if it's alphabetical, but Councilmember Wahab.
Here.
Councilmember Salinas.
Here.
Councilmember Lebanon.
Here. Thank you. And I will ask at this point, first of all, somebody working with Yolanda, what needs to happen?
I think, and Christina, maybe Yolanda, you can make Christina co-host.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now? Still?
Yes.
I still can't hear anybody. I'm sorry.
I'll contact Yolanda offline to see if she can make you a co-host, Christina.
I think I am a co-host.
Okay.
So, I mean, we can.
I think we just proceed.
Proceed. So the next step is to, that's what I don't know. So we have to announce public comments. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so I can work on public comments.
Okay, no problem. Thank you very much. Okay. So do we have any members of the audience who would like to make a comment on something other than the agenda items? Those will have separate public comment sections. So this is just the time for people to raise their hand if they would like to comment on something not on the agenda. Thank you for the clock. Seeing none, we'll move on to the approval of minutes from the September 2nd meeting. A motion or any corrections?
If there's no questions, so moved.
Thank you. Have a second? I second. Thank you. I think we are required to do a roll call vote. So Christina, do you want to do that or Sean?
I can go ahead. Councilmember Salinas.
Yes.
Councilmember Wahab.
Yes.
Councilmember Lamnan.
Aye. And the item passes unanimously for the minutes. Thank you. We'll move on to the strategic roadmap and incentives to housing production.
Great. So let me pull up the presentation, just one moment. All right, can everyone see the presentation?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. I am Christina Morales. I'm the Housing Division Manager, and the item before you is a progress update on the implementation of the strategic roadmap in the context of the housing programs and the incentive to housing production work plan, excuse me. I intend to be brief. There was a lot of information that was provided in the report, but I will provide you information on a summary basis and will be available for questions. But the purpose of this presentation is to give you a comprehensive progress report. We have implemented quite a few plans that are intended to preserve, protect, and produce housing. They're also intended to help the city meet the regional housing need goals and to establish the city as a pro-housing city. And that helps the city to apply for state funds if the state can determine that the city meets the criteria. And the overall intent is for the city to improve housing affordability for the community residents. And as I mentioned, we're covering the different plans. We've actually have several different plans that we've been working for, and staff has been trying to integrate them so that we will be working towards the same goals. And the first of the plans that were approved was an element of the strategic roadmap, was to preserve, protect, and produce housing. We also, the council also adopted the incentives to housing production work plan, which to some extent parallels the goals in the strategic roadmap. And then we adopted an expenditure plan for the federal stimulus funds that are to help with the economic recovery related to the public health crisis. And as much as we could try to align those programs with the previous plans. And lastly, the adoption of the Let's House Hayward strategic plans. Because this is the last one was the most recently adopted plan, we've really spoken to this one on general terms, as it is an element of the strategic roadmap. And to very high level, a summary of the accomplishments is that the staff has completed 11 projects. We have 9 projects that are ongoing. And so what I considered ongoing is something that needs any kind of regular, either annual or regular intervention, such as budget allocation or annual reports. Those would be considered ongoing projects. And then the projects in process, if we've done any preliminary research to move the project forward, if we've secured funding for that project, or if we have started the implementation but not completed. And then we have 5 projects that we have not started. I would like to take a moment to thank not only my staff in the housing division, but in the planning division and also in community services for all the work that the staff has done in order to implement these projects. Because not only have we had a number of things accomplished, we've also managed to accomplish items in response to the public health crisis. And I would really like to just give kudos to the team and the number of different divisions that have worked on these items to move them forward. And we had an extensive list in the report of all the items that were accomplished or ongoing and in progress. But I just wanted to highlight a few of the accomplishments. I think one of the biggest one is the creation of the Let's House Hayward strategic plan, because it really provides us a framework of strategies on how we're going to help people who are experiencing homelessness. And it also helps us in terms when we're applying for funding from the state or looking for opportunities for a really targeted effort in order to address the issue and the experiences that people are living. Also providing ongoing resources for people experiencing homelessness. We have 300 units of affordable housing that have been proposed on city-owned land. And we provided support to the community related to the public health crisis by providing rental assistance, by providing community resources, and by working on the
I don't know what's happening before
Yolanda. And by providing them with the community with, by implementing a moratorium and maintaining that moratorium. We've also been awarded over $8 million in planning grants and also with funds for the development of housing. What we have coming up in the future, I know that there's the much awaited implementation or the evaluation of the Affordable Housing Ordinance, which we intend to start in March of 2022 at the next Homeless and Housing Task Force meeting. And just to give you a preview of what we anticipate evaluating at that first one is the implementation progress of the first ordinance.
It will be
what has been accomplished. What has been accomplished after the, yes?
Christina, I apologize, forgive me. Madam Chair, can we tell Yolanda that she's we can hear her now. And,
she could hear her the whole time. She can't hear us is the problem. And so I know whoever's host keeps trying to mute her. It's why Christina's soldiering on. I understand it's distracting. Sorry about that.
Okay, and I apologize, Ms. Morales, and forgive me.
No worries. And we might, if I could ask one of my colleagues, maybe if we ask Yolanda to log off until we find the issue resolved. I will unclick
and it will go.
I'm also happy to take notes or meeting minutes if you guys need some help.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
Thank you for that offer.
So the first, probably one of the priorities for us for this upcoming year in 2020 is the evaluation of the Affordable Housing Ordinance, starting with looking at the results of implementation of the previously adopted changes to the Affordable Housing Ordinance. The planning is also working on revising the density bonus to update it per state law. But in addition to that, looking at if there are any other best practices in other jurisdictions in terms of expanding the density bonus program. And they intend to have a draft legislation by the June Homeless and Housing Task Force meeting. Planning is also working on adoption of the housing element, which this is a very long-term project, which has already been started and is expected to be completed in mid-2023. And lastly, finishing the implementation of the housing-related projects that are being funded by the federal stimulus fund. As we have 2 of those projects, which we anticipate will be ready and funds available to the community or services available in January of 2020. So very close on those 2 projects. And then anticipate starting on 2 other projects in 2023. So working on those upcoming projects. And that concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions.
Great, thank you. I know that was a lot to juggle, so I appreciate that. Also, just point of privilege, I will absolutely add my appreciation to yours for the excellent work from staff. And I'll go at this point to the community, and then I'll come back to my colleagues for questions and comments. So if there's any member of the public who would like to make a comment on this staff report about housing production, please raise your hand. And I'm not seeing anybody, so I will go to my colleagues who would like to start. Or if you have no comments, we'll move on.
No, I don't have any comments right now.
Okay.
All right.
Councilmember Wahab.
Thank you. So I appreciate the attachment 2, just because it's, easy for me to follow and all the things that we've actually covered. Is there a way to actually see, and I would like for the larger public to know this as well. I think that our staff in particular around housing has gone above and beyond, not only for residential and rental properties, but also commercial properties. So it's the description of the plan, as well as the policy / proposed timeline / status description. It's so brief. And if we can expand a little bit on that, as far as, the financial dollars attributed to those projects, or the number of property owners or residents that have been supported. So for example, on page 1 of attachment 2, it'll say made 1.73 million available in federal funds for rental assistance grants to 670 households. That's great. Do we have that potentially for some of the other projects, if you will? I think that would be incredibly, important to kind of highlight. And then when it says not included on plan, and of course it's completed and therefore it's not included at this moment in time, but just to say that, completed or worked on, during this time range, if you will. But I think that, you guys have gone above and beyond on this particular thing. And then, when we talk about, especially for residents, I think, like, for example, SB 35, if we can kind of explain, what does that really mean? Are we looking at ADUs? Are we looking at what are the options available for residents to engage in some of the changes that we're doing? I think this past week in our last city council meeting, we had a council member who said that, if we make it too difficult and it's not clear enough for residents, they can't properly engage, and they kind of just are like, look, I'm not going to go through it if I can't. Same thing happened with the grants. If we, the businesses that, decided to do the application had support, and our staff is always willing to support. So as long as we can kind of really make it easy and clear as to what we're talking about, I think it's better for the larger public to understand exactly how to potentially apply, or the work that we have done and accomplished. So that's my 2 cents on this particular thing. But again, I do appreciate all the work you guys are doing.
So yes, tremendous progress. Many, many thanks. And I don't have any further comments. This is going where we had said as a council we wanted it to go. And so appreciate that and look forward to the continued next steps.
Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on to our work session. This is the Homekey application.
Great. I'm going to kick it off, and I think Jessica Lebanon and Amy Cole are going to present, but I wanted to just kick this off. And before I switch gears, I do just want to thank Christina and her team for all the hard work on the housing work and development services too, as supporting community services. But Christina has done a great job with her team leading our housing efforts. So thank you, Christina. So tonight we're going to hear a presentation. There's been a lot of work on this. The Homekey, you'll hear more about that, but essentially state grants to acquire properties for households and people at risk of homelessness. And so we have a number of exciting projects that we've been considering. And really, I'm going to let Amy and Jessica give you the kind of the background. But what I do want to say is that it is a very tight time frame this is on. And so and also a lot of due diligence that had to occur in a very short amount of time. So when we would normally come to you with kind of everything tied up in a neat bow with all the questions answered, we just aren't able to do that for this. We've gotten pretty far, but there's just still some questions. We're still doing due diligence on some of these projects, still asking some tough questions, making sure we understand everything. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that there may be questions that you have tonight we can't answer, or that we're acknowledged we don't have yet. And so by the time the council agenda item comes, of course, we'll have those questions answered. But I wanted to just acknowledge, and then there's just a lot of work that had to happen behind the scenes that we've been doing very quickly. So I just wanted to kind of provide that context. And I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Lebanon, who will start our presentation.
Thank you, Jen. Good evening, members of the task force. I'm going to share my screen.
And while Jessica's doing that, I do want to acknowledge that Jessica and Amy have put a lot of time and effort into this. I just want to thank them for all of their hard work on this. So thank you.
Thank you, Jen. So my name is Jessica. I'll be presenting tonight with my colleague, Amy Cole-Bloom. And tonight we'll be talking about, as Jen mentioned, Homekey for potential Hayward project review and discussion. This evening, we'll be providing a brief background on the Homekey Grant, as well as some related applicable RFIs and RFPs from the county, discussing the city's Homekey request for information responses, sharing staff's recommended projects, and then discussion and next steps. So a brief background on the Homekey program. As Jen mentioned, Homekey is state funding from the Department of Housing and Community Development for local municipalities to create dedicated affordable housing for individuals and families experiencing homelessness. Since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, there have been 2 rounds of Homekey, this being the second round of Homekey that we are discussing this evening. Homekey presents a substantial capital funding opportunity for acquisition and conversion and construction of properties to create permanent and interim housing for this population, as well as some operating funds. So it's up to $1,400 a unit. The state will provide 3 years of operating funds if the local municipality can provide 4 years, or the state will provide 2 years of operating funds if the local municipality can provide 3 years. In addition to the capital award, which is up to $200,000 a door, that includes target populations and related bonuses and the operating subsidy. The Homekey Grant is, there is a geographic distribution of the Homekey Grant, meaning that Hayward would be applying within the San Francisco Bay Area bucket of funding. Additionally, there are bonuses related to expedited occupancy and timely submission for January 31st. Applying for Homekey funding is a really exciting opportunity that directly aligns with the City of Hayward's strategic plans to end homelessness. As Christina just mentioned, the strategic plan, the Let's House Hayward plan, was approved by council in July of this year and was created in partnership with the community. Staff in collaboration with our consulting partner engaged in months of community engagement efforts with internal and external stakeholders, key staff, key nonprofits, individuals with lived experience, through focus groups, one-on-one interviews, community meetings, surveys. There was a lot of intentional community engagement with this plan to develop a set of community-informed solutions and action steps for addressing homelessness in Hayward. So through this Let's House Hayward strategic plan, there are a few action steps that directly align with applying for this state funding opportunity. This includes researching new funding sources, including state and federal funding, partnering with nonprofit housing developers, county and regional jurisdictions for hotel conversion projects, and supporting innovative affordable housing projects that utilize innovative affordable housing strategies that incorporate individuals with lived experience in the process. And now I'll turn it over to Amy.
Yes, good evening, everyone. So Alameda County received an allocation of Home Investment Partnership Program funds through the American Rescue Plan Act. So we refer to this as the Home ARP funding that the county has. The county decided to use those funds to assist cities submitting Homekey applications by providing those funds to help with local match requirements, whether it's capital match that cities may need or operating match. The funds could be used either way, with some restrictions. The city submitted 2 proposals in response to the county RFP for Home ARP funding based on initial responses that we received from our own RFI, request for information for Homekey eligible projects. So the city's RFI was a request broadly for all types of Homekey eligible projects. We were comprehensive of all the types that were in the state NOFA. Additionally, in response actually to council's feedback on the Inclusionary Housing Trust Fund NOFA that the city is doing in the spring, staff included language in the Homekey RFI that we put out that aligns with the eligibility for the Inclusionary Housing Trust Fund. So what that means is the Homekey RFI includes a request for emergency shelter and transitional housing projects that can show that they address the impacts of market rate development. We did this explicitly to align with the types of projects for the Inclusionary Housing Trust Fund money, with the intent of submitting eligible projects for Homekey funding and potentially including those that don't fit for Homekey or we can't make work for this round in our pipeline for the Inclusionary Housing Trust Fund projects. You can go ahead to the next slide. So now we're going to spend some time talking about the responses to the city's RFI and the projects that staff are recommending for further discussion today. You can go ahead to the next one. So we received 15 total submissions in response to the RFI for Homekey eligible projects. 6 were directly from hotel or motel property owners who were interested in having their properties purchased by the city through Homekey. 8 were from project sponsors or developers, but I think Homekey uses the sponsor language, and had specific properties or new construction projects identified. So what that means is there was both a developer and operator and a project identified in those. And then we also had one submission that was from a developer that was just talking about their qualifications and their willingness to partner with the city on a Homekey project. We conducted an initial review of these submissions and determined that the projects that came with both that property or project and development and operations providers, those were going to be the most realistic for meeting the tight Homekey timeline. Go to the next slide. So after that initial review of all of the projects to make sure that they were eligible for Homekey, and we determined that those 8 were the most realistic to move forward for a deeper dive analysis, we reviewed those 8 projects using the criteria that you see here on this slide. So we analyzed the cost to the city, given the anticipated Homekey award for the project. We looked at competitiveness of the project for Homekey funding based on the NOFA, who the project would serve, like what the target population would be, how many folks could be housed through the project. as well as its alignment with city priorities and the plans that Christina reviewed in the last item, and the project's ability to meet the Homekey bonuses, both for timeliness, so that submission deadline of January 31st next year, as well as occupancy, for that means construction or renovation completed and occupancy achieved within the 8 months of receiving the award. So that was kind of the overall criteria that we looked at. And Jessica's going to talk to you a little bit next about community engagement before we get into what those projects are.
Great, thank you, Amy. So we've talked a bit about the Let's House Hayward plan and really the extensive community engagement process that we went through as part of the development of that strategic plan. In addition to the community engagement efforts, the plan was developed through best practices research with an explicit lens for racial equity and empowering individuals and families experiencing homelessness. And really, this plan was created to identify a pipeline of community-informed policies and programs for the city to be able to embark upon, particularly those with expedited timelines. Staff are working with our project partners for specific outreach efforts related to each of the projects that we'll talk about shortly. But we did want to highlight some of these overarching community engagement efforts that we've done to come up with these proposals this evening.
Okay, so of the 8 projects, oh, Jessica, you can go ahead to the next slide, sorry.
Thanks.
Yeah. So we're now going to shift to talking about our recommended projects. Before we get into that deeper dive, we just want to state that of the 8 projects, 4 aren't being recommended for funding, primarily due to gaps in both capital and operating funds that would require a significant city subsidy match. For those, we're continuing conversations with those applicants and may consider them either for Homekey Round 3, if there are other funding opportunities that come up, or the city's affordable housing NOFA pipeline as well. And then the projects that we're going to talk about this evening still have some outstanding questions for a lot of them. As Jen was saying at the top, there are still some things that we're figuring out. However, we just want to say up front that we're really excited about these. And we are also really appreciative of the partners we've been working with on this. They've been really flexible. They've been really communicative. We've asked them for lots and lots of information, and they've been really responsive and flexible with jumping on calls and talking to the state with us. So we just want to acknowledge that at the top of this discussion and express our appreciation to those folks. I think Jessica is going to walk us through the first project.
Great. So thank you so much, Amy. I do also want to echo the genuine excitement that our team has towards these projects. And in conversations regionally, a lot of folks are saying, like, this is amazing one-time opportunities for funding. And so it's really exciting to be able to present these projects to you this evening. So the first project that we'll be talking about is an apartment complex acquisition project. The development partner for this is Bay Area Community Services, and the population served would be between 75 and 120 individuals experiencing homelessness and chronic homelessness. This site is a vacant apartment complex currently under renovation. There are no tenants. This property is on Rockaway Lane, which abuts San Lorenzo Creek, which is a frequent location for unsheltered homelessness. Ahead of the council meeting on January 18th, BACS will be conducting preliminary community engagement efforts with the surrounding area. And based on internal conversations with Hayward Police Department and maintenance services staff, staff do not anticipate community opposition to this project. For this project, the capital funding, including renovation, is anticipated to be completely covered by Homekey, and the operating funding for operating this program, BACS has committed to identify the funding for operating. Staff are recommending that the task force move this project forward for council consideration on the 18th. Based on the fact that this has no impact to the city's general fund, there's no capital match required, there's no operating subsidy required. Our development partner BACS would oversee rehabilitation, maintain ownership, and provide the supportive services. Additionally, as we mentioned, as I mentioned earlier, the proposed property is in a neighborhood in a census tract with, apologies, with high rates of homelessness. And the service provider partners are familiar with many of the potential residents. Additionally, we could work on prioritizing placement for that surrounding area. And Amy will talk about the next two projects.
Sorry, I paused for a moment because my dog was answering your dog. I think we're good. All right, so our second project is Project Reclamation, and it's also in partnership with BACS, as well as the cities of Livermore, Union City, and potentially Piedmont. So this is a scattered site model in which BACS would purchase up to 6 single family homes in Hayward and then rehabilitate them to have 5 to 6 bedrooms for a deeply affordable shared housing model. This model has already been successfully implemented in Oakland using Homekey funds in the last round of Homekey. And actually Homekey recognized it as an innovative project for the use of the funds. So we are excited to be able to replicate that in Hayward. BACS has significant experience doing outreach for this type of model. These aren't high density sites. We're talking about single family homes, and the renovations would be limited to interior changes. So we don't anticipate a ton of disruption to neighbors, and can move forward with that kind of neighbor to neighbor outreach once the properties are identified. In terms of funding for this model, we anticipate that the Homekey Award, the per door award, will cover all of the capital and renovation costs. And we have also applied for county home ARP funds to cover the cost of operations. So this is part of the cool thing about this project is the regional aspect. So we, along with Livermore and Union City, have applied to the county for these homes, hoping that it's a way for them to see kind of a streamlined regional approach to the use of those funds for the operating subsidy. Staff recommend this project because in addition to having no capital match and having the qualifications and experience of BACS, this really meets council's call for an additional regional approach, which we heard a lot in the Let's House Hayward process. By partnering with these other cities, the county is also very excited about this project, and it makes our application more competitive by increasing the reach as well as streamlining some of the operating costs. And we're excited about this one because of its innovative approach and its ability to maintain affordable homes in historically more affordable communities of Hayward. It's a useful model for pushing back against this trend of large corporations purchasing homes and renting them out at prices that are too high for the folks who historically have lived there. There are still some outstanding unknowns on this project that we want to highlight. The city's working closely with BACS to get some flexibility on state requirements for documentation at the time of the application submission. So we're still waiting to firm that up with the state. It's an ongoing conversation that we hope to have resolved pretty soon. And we would bring that update to the council meeting in January should this one get recommended to move forward. Jessica, you can move us to the next project. So project 3, this is the tiny home village at South Hayward Parish. The development partner here is Firm Foundation Community Housing, and it's a proposal to build 10 new permanent tiny homes at the South Hayward Parish site on Patrick Avenue, which is across the street from Weeks Community Park. Firm Foundations will do outreach to community members in advance of our January council meeting. But the site is really, we're thinking of it as a continuation of the type of services that are already happening at South Hayward Parish, which includes a food distribution site, as well as a shelter that we've used ARPA funds to expand to year round and are working towards having a day center there as well. For funding, we also anticipate for this one that the Homekey Award would cover the capital costs of the new construction. And we've identified that the city's home investment partnership funding. So not the home ARP funding from the county, but our regular part of the home county jurisdiction that we're in, the consortium. We get an annual allocation and have budgeted that we could do this through those funds, and can be used as a rental subsidy source. We are also very excited about this project. South Hayward Parish is an integral part of the local response to homelessness in Hayward, and we see this one as a really great opportunity for them to take part in the homelessness prevention side as well. And we recommend this project for several reasons that you see up there. Again, no capital match required. You'll see that as a theme across all of these. And Firm Foundations is already moving forward with the entitlement process with the city. So we are optimistic that the construction timeline would be able to meet that occupancy bonus of 8 months from construction to occupancy. There are also still some ongoing unknowns that we're working on with Firm Foundation as well as the state. We're looking for some flexibility around the length of the affordability covenant for this one. There's also a bit of an operating funding gap. Firm Foundations in South Hayward Parish has applied for CDBG funds for services for operating, and they're also looking at some private philanthropy opportunities. So again, those are ongoing conversations that we'll bring an update in January on.
Sorry, it's too sensitive of a screen. And now I can't go back. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. Take 2. Oh my gosh. Sorry. Okay, great. So this next project that we'll be talking about, as we've talked about, this has been a very expedited process, meaning that we and our development partners have been learning as we are moving through this process. Unfortunately, this last project, which we were really excited about, one of our development partners notified us yesterday that the location that we had proposed was not suitable for the needs of the crop reentry employment service campus. So unfortunately, we won't be able to move this project forward with this round of Homekey funding, but we already have made contact with the proposed hotel site. We're continuing conversations with both development partners to see if there are future opportunities to partner. And we'll definitely keep in touch and try to figure out other ways to provide this critical service in the community.
This is back to me. So thank you for listening as we review these recommended projects. You can go to the next slide, Jessica. So staff recommends that tonight the task force discuss these 3 projects. So the apartment complex, the scattered site project Reclamation, and the tiny homes village at South Hayward Parish, and make recommendations to the full council for approval and authorization to apply for Homekey funding for these projects. Please note that staff will bring updated recommendations. So as we get new information, as things change between now and January, we will bring those updates to the full council as well. Go to the next slide. These are our discussion questions that we're asking you to consider, and we'll come back to this slide later so you don't have to frantically write them down or pull out your staff report. But these are the questions we're asking you to consider. Do you have any comments about these projects proposed in the report? Do you have any concerns about the use of the city's home funds for rental subsidies? Do you recommend these 3 projects to council? And then specific to the inclusionary housing trust fund piece, do the responses to our RFI identify the projects to meet the needs of those intended to be served in the emergency shelter and transitional housing that are part of the inclusionary housing trust fund, NOFA, and can these responses be included in the city's affordable housing pipeline if they're not successfully funded through Homekey? We can go to the next slide. So again, we'll come back to those discussion questions, but just to briefly summarize our next steps, our team will continue to work with the state and with our project partners to finalize the projects that the task force recommends tonight to move towards council. And we will bring those to the full council on January 18th with the goal of submitting our approved projects by January 31st, or a little bit later than January 31st. So we have a little bit of a buffer. We didn't say this up front, but we've actually got a really great working relationship with our ambassadors at HCD, with the state. So we've got constant communication, and we look forward to working with them as we submit at that January 31st date. So for questions and discussion, this is our just outline for reference. We'll start with your questions if you have any for clarifying, jump to public comment. I think some of our development partners are here tonight, and then bring it back for task force comments. And with that, thank you. And I'll turn it back to Councilmember Lamnon.
Thank you. And I'm actually going to alter that just slightly,
Oh, great.
and do public comments first, and then we'll do council questions and comments after that. This is our practice in this, but I appreciate a lot of things, but I'll hold those comments for a moment. And also, if just remind folks, if there's an issue with Spanish language translation, to please let us know. We'll try and work with you on that. But I see that Karina Vasari, one of our commissioners, has her hand up. So I'll call on her first. There she is. Go ahead, Karina.
Thank you, Commissioner Lamnon. Good evening, council members and city staff. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was very informative. I just had a couple questions regarding the projects proposed, and this is not to knock the programs because it sounds really exciting and great, but are these projects specific for housing individuals, or is the idea to house possibly couples? Is the idea to hopefully bring families in these spaces? Maybe there's one project versus other that's not. And then the last question I have is, in applying for any of these housing, is the with the holdup of not being able to qualify for these more permanent housing for these individuals, could be based on, because they might have full citizenship, for example, to be here in the United States. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So let's go through the public comments, and then we'll come back and answer questions about eligibility for potential residents and family size, as well as citizenship. Thank you. Ms. Vasari, Jordan Kim. Go ahead. Yeah, there you go.
Hello, my name is Jordan Kim, Project Associate at Firm Foundation Community Housing. I will be reading a statement on behalf of our co-founder, Jake Metcalf. I am Jake Metcalf, co-founder and senior project manager at Firm Foundation Community Housing. I also serve as lead pastor for First Presbyterian Church of Hayward, which is the financial and organizational umbrella for the South Hayward Parish, one of the proposed Homekey projects under consideration. South Hayward Parish currently operates a yearly shelter, resource center, and is open 4 times a week as a food pantry. In 2021, our team has provided over 2,400 beds and 5,500 meals to shelter guests, 52 of whom have transitioned into housing. At our food pantry, we've distributed 2.4 million pounds of food. We joined the Emergency Rental Assistance Program and helped 177 families get $3.3 million in rent and utilities to stay in their homes. As you can see, housing and community well-being is constantly on our minds. In 2020, nearly 500 people in Hayward suffered from homelessness, and the vast majority do not want to be living on the streets. They want to be in a home where they can take a shower, use the bathroom, cook a meal, and be at peace. Home is healing, and that is what we want to provide. It's unrealistic for us to ask the community members suffering from a crisis, whether health, economic, mental health, or housing, to attempt recovering while battling the elements or hunger. If we don't do everything possible to create different, innovative types of housing, we're essentially condemning our community members to a slow and painful death on the streets. Our proposed projects will save lives and help alleviate the suffering in our community. Our team is capable of providing the necessary services and helping all of our participants reach their full potential. Participants living in our proposed tiny home village would have access to all the services and resources currently being offered on site. We hope that you support our projects and allow us to continue to serve our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. And we did receive that in writing as well. And so that is part of the published documents received after published agenda. So that is on the that statement is on the website as well. So thank you for that. Not seeing any additional public comments. So I will turn this back to my colleagues. I will disclose that I met with the Firm Foundation via phone about the project. Go ahead, Councilmember Salinas.
Thank you. Wow, this is great. To say the least. I felt bad not thanking Christine Morales in the last agenda item and not thanking staff. And after all of the congratulatory accolades, I felt terrible. But so now I'm gonna put it all out here right now and say this is really great. Some of the questions that were raised by Karina, as you were talking, I had similar questions around, eligibility. And I don't know how deep we want to get into that. I mean, is this the time to get into those questions? And the first question I had was, are eligibility requirements, are they already set for us, or how much flexibility do we have to establish criteria on who can live there and who can't live there? So I'll start there.
I just want to double check it's appropriate for us to respond now. Great. So let me try to answer everything. So I'll start first with Karina's question. So the target population for the apartment complex site is single adults or coupled adults, so adult families. At this time, not exploring family housing with like minor children, just because it is a different coordinated entry system. And so that may be a bit more complex with this specific project. For the scattered site project, that is also targeting single adults. And the tiny home projects is single or coupled adults. The second part of the question around requirements for documentation or citizenship, with our partners at Bay Area Community Services, that is not a requirement, and so would not impact eligibility for accessing these services. I can't speak to that on behalf of Firm Foundation, but we can definitely engage in further conversations with them to make sure that this would not be an impediment to housing. In terms of the question, Councilmember Salinas, around program eligibility, I think that we're open to input, but there are some things that we are limited in terms of the coordinated entry system, in terms of the physical layouts of the sites that we've selected, and whether or not, like for example, families, it doesn't work in the mixed unit single family home conversion to like scattered site, that it just doesn't work. But so if you have additional input, we can hear that.
Yeah, because, over the years, I mean, I think and I'm sure you're aware of this, over the years, probably the single most greatest concern or just feedback that I've received is that while there may be resources available, resources don't exist for families, and or the other comment I receive is if shelters or if programs do accept families, the requirements are so stringent. Like, for example, for shelters, they don't the requirements for teenagers, like teenage boys, all right, is they don't permit them or they don't allow them, and so families are often caught, they can't participate. There's a home, but then they can't live there. So, that's too bad. But, I mean, I see the opportunities there for single adults and even for couples, because, that's certainly a need. The other question I had was, now the funding part, and I know that you're looking at the relief dollars or those art dollars that we're going to be receiving. Now, will all the funding come from those art dollars, or will the city be using funding from our own revenues to match these funds, or how does that work?
Right now, for all of the capital costs, so for the project reclamation and apartment site, those are acquisition and renovation costs. And for the tiny homes, those are new construction costs. For all of those, we anticipate that the per door award from Homekey will cover those costs. So there's no city funds required for capital. For operating on the apartment complex project, BAX has committed to providing those dollars, so there's no city funds there. For the tiny home village, we've identified the city's annual home investment partnership grant that we get from HUD. Every other year, we would be able to use that to pay for the rent subsidies at the tiny home village. And then on the scattered site project, we've applied to the county for their home ARPA funds to provide the operations funding. So there's no impact to the city's general fund. We're using special revenues from our entitlement that we get through HUD, and then the ARPA award that the county has received, which we're still waiting for confirmation from the county on that we would get that award, but we're optimistic.
Good. So the hotel, so I guess that, so if I understand this right, is the hotel separate of the 4 projects, or is that included in the 3 projects? I'm sorry.
The hotel project, the crop reentry campus, is no longer one that we're bringing for your consideration. It was in the staff report, but it got pulled out yesterday.
Okay. So then the Rockaway, the Rockaway Lane, how many units are in that? I missed that. How many units are in that apartment community?
So at present, there's 72 units, but with proposed rehab, it could be up to 120 individuals housed. So it may be multiple individuals in a unit.
And are they, when they rehab or when they rehabilitate them, are they gonna make them like dorm style, or do we know what the layout will be?
So in some of our preliminary conversations, I think it technically qualifies as like an SRO, because it could be multiple individuals who are not part of a family living together, but their own locked bedroom, their own bathroom, their own kitchen. I mean, think of it kind of like a normal apartment that you might share with a few roommates.
Yeah. And then, so how much, I'm still kind of thinking about this, the flexibility in sort of the requirements and the rules and stuff like that. And how much flexibility will we have? I mean, what do we know what, I'll take the first project, the apartment, how will, and I guess now that I think about it, BAX would have, they would have their own rules and regulations that people would follow, right?
Yeah, and
go ahead, Jessica.
As the city partner, we would work with BAX to make sure that there are rules and program requirements that we're comfortable with as well.
Yeah.
I'd just like to add, I think this is a little different because we didn't have a lot of funding, capital or operating to really bring to the table in some ways. And Homekey requires that a local jurisdiction be the one that applies for this funding. I kind of think this is almost like a pass through, like we're making it available. And because we don't have the funds to add, we're making sure that obviously whoever we partner with has qualifications and we know has a track record of success on projects like this. but it's not kind of a city project in the true sense of like the NAB Center, where we're putting millions of dollars or general fund dollars every year into it. So I think of it almost a little more as like a pass through for our partners because of the way that the state grant is funded. So we're probably not going to have the same flexibility to kind of impose a lot of our own rules or regulations in the same way we might with a city funded project.
And this
Sorry, Mark, I just wanted to quickly acknowledge that. Sorry, just 1 second. I just wanted to quickly acknowledge that Bax was in the room, that John Russell is here today. So if we do have a question, they're there. Sorry, thank you. Yes. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, and then just two last comments. The outreach, regarding outreach, I can imagine that once we start to roll this out, people are going to want to start to sign up, and do we have an anticipated plan on when we're going to start putting? Are we going to put people on a list, or is this going to be a lottery? Is this going to be do we know that, or have we thought
we have thought about it. We don't have like the set in stone plan yet. We would probably largely do a combination of utilizing coordinated entry with some type of local preference. And we'd work, potentially what we've talked about is working to really target that local preference to as specific as the neighborhood that we are proposing this sit in.
Okay, and then lastly, timeline. When do we have a timeline when these projects will be up and open and housing people?
We have a goal timeline based on the state regulations. So we will submit our application by January 31st, and we'll receive notice of an award within 45 days of our submission. Once we get that award notice, the clock starts ticking, and we have 8 months to complete whatever the acquisition, construction, and rehab may be, and reach occupancy to receive a bonus of $10,000 per unit.
Wow. Okay.
So we're motivated to meet that timeline, and our partners know about that timeline and have all submitted in their proposals a timeline that fits within those parameters.
Man, because I'm just looking at that. If the apartment complex over on Rockaway is the place that I'm thinking about that I've seen, man, they're going to have to hustle to get that thing, unless the thing is farther along than what I think it is. But
yeah, and they're definitely aware of the timelines and have committed to making those timelines happen.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Councilmember Wahab, did you want to weigh in?
Yes. On project number 2 that you guys showed on your slide, stating that it's been extremely successful in Oakland, how are we measuring success?
Primarily from the recognition from the state that they highlighted it and gave it an award for the innovative use of Homekey funds. Additionally, I believe they've been doing it for several decades, and they've got tenants who have been in those units for 20 years. I know Jonathan is here, and he can probably speak more to the specific data that they have on the effectiveness of the program as well.
Okay, and my concern is, and I think we've heard it on council multiple times as well, is that as we are giving these funds, whether it's passed through or not, the amount of time and effort that you all spend on it, staff and so forth, taking away from certain projects that we would like to work on, right? Is that if we can really ensure that we are hitting certain marks that we would like to hit. Number one, obviously, I think you guys mentioned it, that we are helping Hayward residents primarily, right? That there has to be an intake of data that is shared with us from the entry of the type of person that is, seeking help, right? Education background, do they have a job, income, things like that. And then as they are transitioning into this housing, even a year later, where are they at, right? So for example, I've given the example of different nonprofits in the LA area. They will see if the person has a GED, if they can hold down a job. If they can't, they're trying to push that person to get a GED, to hold down a job, to potentially have permanent housing ongoing, rather than, constantly in a program like this. Specifically for our homeless population, right? Granted, there's only so much we can do, but at the same time, it's, we have to set kind of the standard pretty reasonable and effective. We need to ensure that our dollars are being used to help people permanently, right? Not just, temporarily for a couple months or, a year or something like that. So making that a requirement for BACs, as well as, any other organization that we engage with, I think that, there has to be some requirement from the city of Hayward as we help them get money to do these projects, right?
To clarify, I'm sorry, because I want to get the notes right. You mean the data collection piece?
We need to make sure that, the individual is truly being helped. It's not just a Band-Aid solution to a gunshot wound, right? That there is permanent. So for example, BACS does not only just provide housing, they provide wraparound services like employment coordination and, all the other stuff that they do. So if that's the case, we need to make sure that the effort and time that we're spending as staff, as even council members and community, that it is being beneficial long term, right? That is, I really want to stress out the long term, right? And as much as possible. And Jessica, I think you want to say something.
Yeah, I was gonna just highlight that these are permanent programs. This is permanent housing. And then we also wanted to invite Jonathan Russell from BACS to speak to some of the earlier questions that you brought up. But if you wanted to keep talking, we can have him speak in a moment.
Definitely. And Jonathan, feel free to chime in. But one of the concerns is, so again, permanent, and how are we helping these people and keeping kind of like a little bit of a story, or as they call it, I forget what they call it in the nonprofit world, but basically a little story that this person started from here is here 5 years later, right? Because of this program, especially Hayward residents. And granted, with homeless population, it's harder to, technically they can use a nonprofit for the residency status, and BACS does operate in Hayward. So it's harder to truly state that we are helping Hayward's, several hundred homeless population. But that is something that's incredibly important to me. I also think that it should go in hand in hand, potentially also with our wealth building, and Assistant City Manager Jennifer Ott. So as much as, if we were to do a pilot project in that collaboration to help these people even further, right? And then as far as the tiny homes project, I think that's a good project. I kind of wanted to take a look at, see if there is a design or a plan that, can be shared, long term. But overall, I think it's perfectly fine. But I just worry a little bit as to, so how does the funding eventually stop from the state? Is it ongoing for, 10 years, 20 years? Is there a guarantee that they will continue to get funding? What happens if funding stops from the state? What is our, efforts there?
So in terms of the capital funding, so that's a one-time upfront award to acquire and renovate. In terms of the state money for operating, as Jessica mentioned earlier, there's a ratio. So if the city puts in 4 years of operating subsidy, the city will match, or the state will match with 3, and then it bumps down a year. If we put in 3, they match with 2. So there are, for each of these projects, we've been able to identify 4 years of operating funds to secure the 3-year match from the state. But beyond that, we reach that 7-year, and then there's a conversation to have that I think I can let Jen chime in there about what that looks like.
Well, I mean, I think why don't we ask Jonathan, just because I think what I hear you talking about, Councilmember Haber, how does one measure success, right, with a program like this? Obviously, we're putting someone who's no longer unhoused, they're now in permanent housing, so that in and of itself is a successful outcome. But you're kind of wanting to know other kind of indicators. So I'm wondering if we could promote Jonathan and allow him to answer some of these questions. And then in terms of funding, how we start working now on making sure there's sustainable funding for these programs long term. And so I'm sure that's something that BACS we're talking about with them, and that they're thinking about as well.
And the reason why I stress the data point and in everything we do is because, in my experience, a lot of these organizations will say, we service this many people, so forth, and that's nice. but what is the long-term effect? And that over time is not measured. Almost majority of nonprofits won't measure this. And I think that we do need to hold them more accountable if this is technically their business, right? So that is my concern.
Okay, no, I think that's fair. So Jonathan, are we able to promote him or to allow him to speak?
I'll go ahead and promote him.
So that was.
I have lost Jonathan.
Oh, no.
Where did he go?
I don't know.
Well, if he chimes back in, I'll pause. And
But we are
let him
happy. I mean,
speak.
again, we're still working with all these providers, so we're happy if we can't get him back onto. Oh, there he is. He
Oh, wait,
appeared.
he was promoted.
Excellent.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me?
You went into purgatory there, Jonathan. We're a bit.
Sorry about that. Can you guys hear me now?
We can.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for the questions. Lots to definitely discuss there. To the point of the Councilmember Wahab, the question around sort of long-term sort of tracking and following folks and capturing that story. I think the nonprofit lingo is that vignette of success, of stability ongoingly. That's definitely something that we have and do in this project. As you say, this project, part of what makes it possible is it has a relatively thin operating line itself, right? So it doesn't cost a lot to do the ongoing support. And part of the way that BACS does that is we're, of course, leveraging all of the other services we provide that are community-based and that folks might be eligible for. You mentioned supported employment in cases where that might be part of someone's long-term pathway and goal for ongoing stability. Of course, connection to clinical behavioral health services, all those things as well. So our model really includes, and that's included in the funding that would be provided for this program, funding for dedicated staffing for these homes that would be function as residential service coordinators as any other affordable housing single site complex might have. And that residential service coordinator would be working across the homes to support people to do weekly house meetings, right? To make sure everyone is living well together, needs are met, connecting people to other linkages, other resources, and supporting them with whatever those needs may be. So that definitely is built into the model. As we and many others say, it's a housing first, not a housing only model. So it's not about having someone behind a closed door. It's about having them living in a thriving community and be supported, which I will say as an aside is why we think that this truly neighborhood-based model is really, really important. As I feel like I say 5 times a day, peddling this idea of scattered site, it's, we can't give up the neighborhoods to unaffordable housing. And it's really critical to have that truly sort of community integrated neighborhood-based approach, I think, which is really different. And really important. So to the success, yeah, I mean, without, trying to sound arrogant, it has been very successful. We've been doing this for 40 some years. Actually have a home that we've been operating in Hayward for a very long time as well, that has folks that have lived there for a very long time. And one of our longest term residents has lived there for 28 years, and that's actually in Livermore. And so I think it's a model that works, and it's a model where we track and continue to provide those services. By way of funding, we'll also be leveraging county sources, not just to provide this initial operating that Hayward is asking for on behalf of the project, but really in order to provide ongoing support service dollars. So just as if this project moves forward, just as we applied for and have received commitments for other Homekey projects from the county to pay for an annual commitment to pay for support services for permanent support housing projects, for example, we are very much working with them under the understanding that, this is the same kind of housing that needs the same kind of support. And so paying for that annual support. And so that is a way to dovetail into your very important question around what happens after 7 years, which I will say as a caveat, unfortunately, this is affordable housing world. There are no permanent sources that someone can get grant-wise, right? So great, we've got operating subsidies for 30 years. Unfortunately, locally, state-wise and federally, we just don't have those sources yet. So part of the game, part of the hustle, if I might say, is plotting those timelines and finding those ongoing sources. So we certainly will be doing so beyond the 7-year point. I will say, relative to kind of the way that this work is done, 7 years is actually a really, really stable project in terms of having that much committed funding. And the other thing I will say, though, we can't technically talk about it because it's locked up in the courts. Measure W, which was passed and is currently, unfortunately, wrapped up in the courts. Part of the intention there, the express intention, is to be providing the ongoing subsidization for both permanent supportive housing and other deeply affordable housing units that are coming online and serving folks exiting homelessness. So we're certainly counting on that as a big source that will be serving many projects, including these, which their estimation is that within the next 2 years, that will be, free and back into the discussion.
So
Wait, just-
the individual, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The individual that has stayed in a house for 28 years.
Mhm.
Now, my concern is largely, have they been able to move into their own home ownership rather than relying on backs? That is my concern.
Home ownership, you're saying?
Home ownership, or being able to rent on their own or move out of the backs program and have another person fill the spot. Because
Yeah.
my goal is to have as many people serviced in a way that they can stand on their own 2 feet.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I would argue, that they are standing on their own 2 feet. They just happen to be an older adult that's on SSI, right? So in another possible world, backs wouldn't need to exist, and there would be an affordable option for a senior who has some disabling conditions and now, is a senior on SSI, but has been on SSI for the past 30 years, right? Which can barely afford you a cup of coffee, let alone an apartment at the current rates. So this is an individual that is, I would put kind of on that permanently affordable, deeply affordable needs pathway. They are an older adult on SSI and doesn't really have opportunity or pathway off of SSI given their needs. So for them, I think that is their own 2 feet, and their own 2 feet involve our supports in this case. But it's a great question, because I think this model also serves a wide range of folks compared to, for example, permanent supportive housing that is also intended to be permanent, is much more expensive in terms of the subsidization required, and is very, very costly. On average, about $500,000 over the lifetime of a person receiving permanent supportive housing. Again, it's a great resource, but there's very little what in the housing world we call flow. People go into permanent supportive housing and they very rarely leave those units. So to your point, you build 100 units, for $700,000 a unit, and deep subsidies of permanent supportive housing. For many, many years, you've only served about 100 people, right? People go and stay. This model, because it really can serve as a stair step and a pathway model. So we have a lot of folks that move in because it's deeply affordable, but they are on an employment pathway. So they're there for a couple of years while they're stabilizing, they're getting a job, they're building community. And as they're more stably employed, great, they're able to transition to a studio. We support them with it. So it's a model that definitely has that more opportunity for flow, but it's not designed only to be that. It's not transitional housing. There are people, a huge number of people experiencing homelessness in our system right now, including in Hayward, that are on fixed incomes, and they're doing everything they can, and that's just their reality. And we believe they need, dignified housing in the community too, that they can live in permanently and, pay 30% of their income and live a life in their neighborhood just as I did.
I just want to put a little finer point on this model. Is a little different than the navigation center model, which is really one of having people, getting people off the street into more of a transitional model where we then have housing placement services provided. This is the state funding is for permanent housing. Obviously, as Jonathan said, the scattered site model provides a little more flexibility in that. So you could have kind of a little bit more of a combination of both, but the intent here is to acquire these properties and actually create permanent housing for unhoused individuals. So it is a little different than the navigation center model. And I would just also want to acknowledge Councilmember Wahab, I really liked your idea about some of these other programs that we're working on, like the wealth building and other, actually targeting, having part of that community conversation being about maybe we're actually targeting the residents that are in these city funded projects or these city partnerships as maybe the population we want to prioritize. And that, we obviously don't have to decide that tonight, but I think it's a great conversation to have as we start doing engagement around those other funding sources, is whether or not we should be focusing on these populations first as a way to help those residents build wealth or to get an education or other ways. So just a couple additional thoughts for you.
No, I do appreciate it. I heard Jonathan say, my frustration is largely the fact that, there's other models that I've seen where, they literally have the homeless navigation as well as the tiny homes, as well as eventually small home ownership. So it's, 500 square feet, 600 square feet, basically a very small studio apartment type of vibe where they start to transition all on one site, right? Some of the other states north of the Bay Area have been doing this model, and we can actually see the individuals that have been serviced, that have been getting the support, with also the on-site support of education and employment and so forth. So it's just something a little bit more tangible, a little bit more, you see the progress and things like that. And I think that we will also need to consider diversifying our partnerships too, just to have a little bit more of a competitive model. I think that's important too.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point that we have a lot of different programs, within the city that we're working on, like for instance, Christine and her team, where we have a lot of home ownership units that were as part of affordable projects, inclusionary projects. And so I like this idea that we could all be thinking a little more. I think we have all the pieces, or we're getting close to having all the pieces in the city. And so maybe it's not on one site, but maybe we're thinking more integratively about how we partner between, Christina and community services, they always work together, but maybe we're thinking about how we can kind of connect these different programs that we're working on and funding. And so I think it's a great point, and we can definitely look into that.
And definitely also when we invite some of these stakeholders that are the nonprofits that are governing this, of course we have our local churches, which I think do a great job throughout, many, many years, but also having a wider net, if you will, as to everyone kind of suggest their project, not just, one or two groups that we're familiar with. I think that's incredibly important as well.
Yeah, and I will say that we did do that. We reached out to a pretty wide group of potential partners and sponsors for this. So, and we did have, for instance, I know it, but EAH and MPI and Eden also, but one of the criteria, just because we don't have the funding, was really projects that could be self-sustaining without city subsidy. And so these are the projects that that rose to the top for that reason, just because we don't have the fiscal support right now to be able to help. But absolutely. And we did put, and like, for instance, on Partial Group 8, we're working with Resources for Community Development. And so we absolutely agree that we want to try to work with lots of different partners.
And I appreciate the work you guys are doing. I genuinely do. And I just want to highlight this last point is that I'm very concerned as to how COVID, the inflation rates, everything that we're seeing, as I've mentioned in the previous meeting, that it hits us a little bit later, 2 years later, almost, before we see the effects. And as a city, I just want us to be fiscally viable 2 years down the road and not, worry about which program are we going to cut. I want these programs to be fully sustainable, self-sustainable. And I've said this about the Homeless Navigation Center from day one as well. That is my biggest worry. So I just want to put that on everybody's radar. I've said it for the record, and I appreciate all the work you and your staff do. So thank you guys.
Well, and I will say, I thought of you, Councilmember Wahab, when we were looking at these, where we were like, no city subsidy. I was like, Councilmember Wahab is going to be very hopefully happy, because we're not depending on city funding for these, and BACS really is stepping up and working to find other resources so that we're not having to be part of that financial equation, since I agree with you, we can't afford to subsidize all of these projects.
Okay. As much as we want to, we can help set them up, apply with them as well, be that pass through, but it's just long-term, we're going to have other problems that make, come through in the next 2 years that we have to at least be aware of and vigilant. So thank you guys.
Thank you. So I will join my colleagues in encouraging moving these forward to council. I understood our consensus correctly. And my colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong on that. I am also really excited and really grateful for this work. All of the grants that were highlighted in the last report, all the grant work that's highlighted in this report, it is, I remember the days of being on the other side of the dais and saying, we have nothing for singles and couples without children. And now we have this whole menu that is being developed, some of which is already showing success, some of which we're talking about tonight in the pipeline. It is phenomenal and exciting. And I'm just not touching the ground, and I'm trying to contain myself, but I'm escaping. So it's just really exciting. Thank you. And saying all of that and knowing that need for singles and couples without children, I absolutely do know that we also have families living on the street still. And I know that that's still on everybody's radar. And as we look at for instance, the scattered site, I'm curious about, is there a function of that for perhaps around 3 looks at families, or as we look at our transition of properties, the tax foreclosure properties that the city is already looking at in future fiscal year, does that give us an opportunity to then have the pendulum swing a little bit now that we've attended to this area that we had never attended to? So I look forward to continued work on that. And I do think that all of the programs we've worked with don't have citizenship requirements, as I recall. So that's, I'm glad that was raised. Was the Islander any of the hotels that was suggested? Yes, I'm seeing nods. So it's not ready yet, but.
Go ahead.
Well, I have been in touch with the property owner a number of times, even before the Homekey came out, and we've tried to partner. We've talked to a couple of affordable housing developers that have worked with other Islander hotels and other communities like Fremont and Alameda. And so we've tried, and then they did submit as part of the RFI. But I will say their price that they're asking for is pretty significant. And in part because I will say that I think they have unrealistic expectations about what their property is worth. And it may just be that they're at a point where they're, they just want that. And if they don't get it, then they're not willing to sell it. I think at some point we'll get there, and so we keep having those conversations. I know staff smile because I'm always asking about it too, because I do think there's a lot of, potential there, but we weren't able to make it work because of the financial gap that was required for the acquisition of that parcel, given what the property owner's expectations are.
Okay, no, I appreciate that it's on the radar. So I think there's one, the Firm Foundation proposed the 2 projects we heard about. One is the one that's being recommended for going forward. I wanted to put on the table and sort of see if there was maybe a little bit of room to talk about this. It may not work, but for the, I think of it as Church of the Nazarene, it's not called that anymore, but that's what it used to be called on Gadding. That, in having talked with case manager at East Bay and the students who came and spoke to this committee and to the council in the past about college student homelessness, those students are able to pay rent, which is different than, for instance, the South Hayward Parish site. Cal State does have some subsidy funding. It's not a lot, but they do have some. And I'm thinking it might be worth just a conversation to see if there's enough pieces of that puzzle to bring a 4th project back. Is that making any sense? Okay. So
it does. Jen, do you want to speak to this?
Well, no, I think, I think and are you talking about you're talking about the Gadding site, not the Hayward First Church site? Are you talking about the one that?
I think it's the same.
Yeah,
the same.
I think
Okay, so
that's what it's called now.
Gadding.
Okay, got it. Okay, and so we're happy to look at it and talk about it. I mean, I think, and see if there's a potential for operating subsidies. I think it may be difficult for us to get all that figured out before January, especially with the break. But we're happy to take a look, or if you have a particular contact at CSU, we could make a phone call and just see. We're absolutely committed to looking at that because we know the student housing is something that came up in the Let's House Hayward plan, and it's something that I think all of the members of this task force have brought to our attention. So we're happy to continue to look for, especially for 3.0. But if you have a contact, we could make a call and see. It would have to fit pretty easily into what we already have as kind of our framework to be able to make it work on such a tight time frame. But if there are subsidies that are available and we think we can make it work, then we're happy to consider it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm asking. It's not to spend a ton more time, but one, maybe two conversations. If the pieces are already there, great, and it makes sense. If not,
well, and if not, then we'll just have those conversations just flow right into that Homekey 3.0, and then we'll be definitely ready, hopefully by then, to be able to put that project forward.
Exactly. Now, I really appreciate, the comments around the RFP were about building this pipeline, and so I'm really excited to see that starting to fill out. Sorry, just looking at my notes really quick. The one other thing was I did have a little bit of exchange with the head of the Housing Authority of Alameda County, since I sit as the city's rep on that board, to see, because HUD had recently released more housing vouchers. Unfortunately, they're not eligible to be project-based vouchers. So there are people that have them that don't have units yet. So they might be somebody that could use this housing, but by the time the units built, hopefully they've found places, but I don't know. But one of the things he did say is that, there is periodically mainstream vouchers, which are specifically for folks who are homeless. You guys all know that better than I do. And those can be project-based, and the timeline that these kind of projects that we're talking about tonight can come online makes them really a good fit for that. So not right now, but I'll continue to talk with him about, it doesn't sound like there's a lot available right now. There's vouchers just sitting unused yet, but I know that the county has released more mainstream vouchers kind of each year. So maybe, and some of them, for instance, have been targeted for the Ruby Hill place. So maybe we can target some for Hayward projects as well.
Yeah, we did have a conversation at one point with the Alameda County Housing Authority, and the project-based vouchers are very difficult to get, and all the affordable housing projects want them. But we are tracking that, and that was something that Christina is also tracking, and for the the new affordable housing development. But we'll absolutely, if you find out anything, please let us know, and we'll continue to track that.
Right, ahead of me as usual. And if there's anything I can do from the commission side, let me know. Happy to help push that. Okay. Again, many thanks. And with that, we will move along.
And so, Councilmember Lamb, I think we made this as a work session. I just can't remember, but I just want to make sure that there's support by all three of the task force members to move this forward in a recommendation. And so, if this was a work session and not an action item, then our fault. But I just wanted to kind of see if we could do a little vote or some sort of show of hands that you guys are all comfortable moving these three projects forward to the council, if that's okay with you.
Yes.
See nods from Mark and hearing yes from both of my colleagues, and certainly a yes.
Thank you so much. Sorry about that.
No, I'm glad you confirmed. I thought I had heard that consensus, but it's always great to reconfirm it. So thank you for that. And thank you to my colleagues for moving this forward. Okay, anything else on this item? Seeing none, I'll move on. We have the tentative schedule of future items. Some of that was covered earlier. All of that is in the agenda packet. Are there any other items that people want to talk about in the future or that haven't been mentioned earlier? Hearing none, then any other announcements or referrals from either staff or my colleagues?
I just want to say again, just to reiterate, because I've asked for this a couple of times over the course of the last year, The programs that we have already completed and assigned and are currently working on, as well as the dollar amount allocated to it, and timeline of, it took us 10 months, 11 months, 1 year, 5 years, something like that. I think the public should know how much effort we've been putting into housing. This core team here, from our rent stabilization to everything that we're doing today, it's very clear that we are, as much as possible, trying to preserve, protect, and produce housing and individuals in housing. So as much as possible, if we can kind of have that data out there for the public and updated, I think that's beneficial.
Is that different than, certainly there's lots to toot horns about for sure. I guess what I'm not clear on is that different than, for instance, the status report we received today, the discussion we'll have in January about the strategic plan?
It's not.
We do this in a lot of ways. So is there something different you're asking for?
Yeah, it's not necessarily to present to us or anything. I think, our assistant city manager understands kind of, I've had conversations in the past, just for the larger public, when they talk about, well, what are we doing about homelessness? What are we doing about, these rent pieces? We're already doing a lot of it. It's just one consolidated, here's our little Excel sheet ticker of exactly what we've done, how much we've given, the course of like the homeless navigation took 10 months. We put this much money. This is our partner. If you need help and resources, reach out to Bax, kind of a thing. So we have it. I just think that it's not easy to access. And a lot of people are still asking, and will continue to ask unless we put that out there on the website.
Yeah, and I guess I interpreted it too, maybe also that maybe we could work with our media relations also to kind of, how do we,
yes, that's
good. We talk about this internally all the time, is like, oh my gosh, we're exactly what you're saying, Councilman. We do so much. Do people really understand all that we're doing? And so it's something we struggle with. We kind of know it, but how do we get that message out? And so we're happy to talk to our community media relations team and continue to try to, and they put articles out, and we try, but maybe there's a more comprehensive way to get the word out to the public, or so we'll keep working with them to try to continue to message that. And I think that's what I hear you asking for. So we'll keep trying to do that.
And this was also discussed at the last council meeting, when I had referenced a sort of an inventory of
same thing. Yep.
Yeah, an inventory of all the stuff that we're, in this case, it's housing, but I'm also sort of, enveloping the, the dollars that we are connecting people to, real dollars that we're connecting people to, and sort of a whole inventory of that, because I think it's, I don't need it tomorrow, or I don't need it, next week, but something as we, as you sort of, think about all the things that we're doing, sort of a high level list of sort of what it is. So,
just even the economic development, the grants that we have given out, the loans we have given out, and these are far better than what they would receive, in the private world, right? Because we are helping, it's the city, we're not looking to profit, and how much we are connecting people and how many people we are connecting, right? I think that's incredibly important to show, again, the progress that the city is making for the larger public.
Thank you. I did want to announce, as our city staff said last night in the Community Services Commission, that the homeless count is coming. And that's January 25th, and volunteers are welcome. So keep an eye on Everyone Home's communications for more information about that. And appreciate the city staff working with Everyone Home on that.
Jessica, could you just tell the date of that? I think it's
Tuesday, January 25th, and it's at 5 a.m.
Indeed. And then Tuesday, the 21st of December, so next Tuesday, there will be a virtual memorial for all folks in Alameda County who have passed away, who were homeless. And so Zoom information is available about that. Healthcare for the Homeless is putting that on. And if you are looking for more information, feel free to contact. Any other items for the good of the order? Seeing none, I wish everybody a joyful new year and a warmth and safety this season. Thank you so much for all the great work. Have a good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
Thanks.
Recording stopped.
Thanks for doing double duty, Christine.
Christina, do you have an end webinar function? Oh, she's gone.